I didn't know my life was about to change forever that Christmas night. I thought I was walking into another humiliating holiday dinner with my husband's family. Instead, I walked into an ambush that would finally expose everything they had been hiding and everything they thought I would never dare to say. The house itself was already a warning. My father-in-law's mansion looked like a Christmas magazine had exploded inside it. Gold everywhere, mistletoe hanging from every possible corner. A Christmas tree so massive it felt like it had its own gravity, but none of that warmth reached me. I remember sitting at that long mahogany dining table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Something felt wrong long before anyone opened their mouth. On the drive over, my husband, Daniel, had been different, too pleasant, too attentive. He smiled at me for the first time in months, his hand resting on my knee as if we were still the couple everyone thought we were. That alone should have terrified me. Across the table sat his father, Robert, ruling the room like a monarch who'd never been challenged. Silver hair perfectly styled, posture sharp. The kind of man who believed money gave him the right to decide who mattered and who didn't. Next to him was Daniel's sister Lisa, already drunk, already smirking. She gave me that familiar look, the one that said she tolerated my existence but wouldn't lose sleep if I disappeared. And then there was the stranger. Tall, blonde, immaculate suit. The kind of man who looked like he'd been assembled inside an Ivy League admissions office. He kept glancing at my husband with a strange familiarity that made my stomach tighten. I felt it then. That quiet instinct women learn to trust, too late. Robert cleared his throat. Everyone froze. "Everyone," he said, lifting his wine glass. "I'd like you to meet Alex Worthington, Harvard MBA, excellent family connections." The pause that followed felt deliberate, cruel. "He'll be absolutely perfect to step into your role at the company," Robert continued smoothly, "once the divorce is finalized and you're laid off." The words hit me like ice water. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the laughter started. My husband laughed first, sharp and high, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Lisa followed, nearly choking on her wine. Even Robert smiled, satisfied. They were watching me, waiting. Waiting for tears. Waiting for a breakdown. Waiting for the collapse they had rehearsed in their heads. I didn't give it to them. I reached for my bread roll, slowly. Carefully, I buttered it with surgical precision. "How lovely," I said calmly. The table went quiet. I looked directly at Alex, who suddenly looked like he regretted every decision that brought him there. "Did they mention," I continued, my voice steady, "that the company you're being recruited to replace me in is legally registered under my name?" The laughter died instantly. My husband's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered against the plate. "And Alex," I added gently, "did they also mention the prenup my husband signed so eagerly, back when he believed marrying me was his shortcut to an easy life?" That was... His hand shook. He choked, violently. And as he coughed at that beautiful table, surrounded by crystal and gold, I realized something for the first time in 6 years. They thought they were executing me, but they had no idea whose house of cards they were sitting in. Before that Christmas dinner, before the laughter and the choking silence, I truly believed I understood my marriage. I was 34 when everything finally fell apart. At the time, I told myself that was still young enough to rebuild if I had to. But back then, I didn't think rebuilding would ever be necessary. Daniel and I met 6 years earlier at a business networking event neither of us wanted to attend. I had been invited by a client. He had been sent by his father. He stood out, not because he was impressive, but because he looked uncomfortable. Too polished for the crowd he was in. Too eager to prove something he hadn't yet earned. I thought we understood each other. I was already building my company then. Not flashy, not glamorous, just solid, steady work. Long hours in a cramped office above a Chinese restaurant where the smell of fried noodles clung to my clothes no matter how late I stayed. The seed money had come from my grandfather. Nothing obscene by high society standards, just enough to start if you were disciplined and stubborn. Daniel liked to tell people he admired my independence, that I was refreshingly grounded. In hindsight, I think he admired the results, not the effort. When I met his family for the first time, I knew instantly I wasn't what they had envisioned. Robert shook my hand like he was evaluating a defective product. Lisa scanned me head to toe, her smile tight and dismissive. Their world was polished surfaces and inherited confidence. I didn't belong. At first, I tried. I learned the rules of their dinners, when to speak, when to stay silent, which wine glasses to touch, and which to pretend I understood. Robert loved introducing me as Daniel's temporary upgrade. The first time he said it, everyone laughed. I laughed too. I told myself it was just rich people humor, that I was being sensitive. Daniel never defended me. He would squeeze my hand under the table afterward and whisper, "He doesn't mean anything by it. You know how he is." Over time, those introductions became routine. Charity galas, country club lunches, holiday parties filled with people who looked at me like I was an uninvited guest who had overstayed her welcome. And Daniel? He learned. He learned to mirror his father's tone, to criticize my clothes, my car, my lack of presence. "You don't really fit in with my friends," he once told me, casually, as if commenting on the weather. "They don't know what to do with you." His friends were women whose greatest accomplishment was marrying well. Their biggest hardship was a personal trainer running late. Lisa loved to offer advice. "You're just not flashy enough," she'd slur after her third glass of wine. "Daniel needs someone who looks the part." She was on her third divorce before 40. But no one ever questioned her authority. The strangest part was how normal it all became. I started measuring my words, shrinking myself, convincing myself that love meant endurance. While Robert lectured me about legacy and tradition, he quietly inserted himself into my business. He called himself a strategic advisor, a mentor. I let him. Not because I needed him, but because I believed marriage meant compromise. What I did, they believed marriage meant merger, that my company, my assets, my work automatically became theirs the moment I said, "I do." And I let them believe it. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. They didn't arrive as explosions. They crept in quietly, disguised as small changes I convinced myself were nothing. Daniel started coming home later. Not dramatically late, just late enough to feel intentional. Dinner growing cold on the table, text messages left unread for hours. When I asked, he always had an explanation ready. Meetings ran long. Dad needed me. You know how unpredictable business can be. His tone changed too. Colder, sharper. Affection became conditional. I only received it when I agreed with him, when I stayed silent during family gatherings, when I played the role they preferred. Robert's presence in my company grew heavier. He began walking through the office like he owned the place, commenting on staffing decisions, second-guessing strategies he didn't fully understand. Whenever I pushed back, he smiled. "This is how real businesses operate," he'd say. "You'll learn." Daniel started repeating his father's words at home, almost verbatim. "You're too emotional about these things. Dad has more experience. You should listen." The line between husband and proxy blurred. Lisa's behavior shifted too. She started dropping comments about Daniel's options, about how many women in her circle would kill to have his lifestyle. I told myself she was just being cruel for sport. But cruelty always carries information if you're brave enough to listen. I noticed the way Daniel's phone never left his hand, how he angled the screen away from me, how he smiled at messages he never shared. When I asked who he was talking to, he didn't look up. Just work. I wanted to believe him. That was the hardest part. The tension bled into everything. Silence at breakfast, forced conversations at night, a distance in bed that felt wider than the space between continents. And yet, every time I thought about confronting him, his family appeared. Robert would call, Lisa would invite us to dinner. Another event, another reminder of my place. The pressure was constant, subtle, but relentless. I began questioning myself. Was I too independent, too focused on work, not flexible enough? I replayed conversations in my head, searching for the moment I broke something. The irony was brutal. While I was busy doubting myself, they were already planning my exit. The Christmas dinner wasn't spontaneous. It was the result of months of quiet alignment. And I didn't see it because I never imagined my own husband would sit beside them while they sharpened the knife. The moment Robert introduced Alex at that table, something inside me went completely still. Not calm, not peaceful. Still, like the quiet right before glass shatters. I remember the exact weight of the knife in my hand, the faint hum of the chandelier above us, the way the room smelled faintly of pine, wine, and something metallic I would later recognize as fear. They had rehearsed this. Every smile, every pause, every word. Robert didn't even look at me when he said it. He looked at Daniel, as if seeking confirmation. Daniel gave him a barely perceptible nod. That nod hurt more than the words. When the laughter erupted, I felt heat crawl up my spine, flooding my chest, tightening my throat. For a split second, I thought I might actually cry. But then, something else took over. Precision. I focused on small things. The texture of the bread, the sound of my own chewing, the deliberate calm of my movements. How nice, I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. When I told Alex the company was legally mine, the air changed. Not dramatically, subtly, like oxygen being quietly siphoned out of the room. Daniel's reaction was immediate. Shock flashed across his face before he masked it with irritation. "You're exaggerating," he snapped quickly. Too quickly. "Don't embarrass yourself." Embarrass myself. The word landed wrong. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. His jaw was tight. His eyes avoided mine. There was no confusion there. Only panic. That's when I knew. He had known exactly what his father planned. He had agreed to it. When I mentioned the prenup, Daniel's hand betrayed him. It trembled. He tried to recover, lifting his wine glass like nothing had happened, but his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The choking fit that followed was violent. "Oh my God, Daniel," she slurred. "Drink some water." Robert patted his back with the kind of concern reserved for optics, not care. I watched. Detached. As Daniel struggled to breathe, I felt something inside me break cleanly in two. The marriage I thought I had, and the reality sitting in front of me. When he finally recovered, his eyes were glassy with fury. "You're doing this on purpose," he hissed under his breath. "You're trying to make a scene." I leaned toward him. "No," I said softly. "I'm responding to one." That's when my husband made his fatal mistake. He leaned back, smirked, and said loudly enough for the table to hear, "Alex, you should ignore her. She panics when she feels cornered. It's a pattern." Something snapped. Not explosively. Cleanly. I realized with stunning clarity that I was no longer defending myself. I was documenting them. Every word, every reaction, every assumption they believed would protect them. And in that moment, I decided something, quietly, without ceremony. I was done protecting their illusions. The strange thing was how calm I felt on the surface. Inside, everything was splitting apart. But years of swallowing insults had trained me well. I knew how to keep my face composed while my chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. Not one of them looked surprised. Not truly. Lisa's eyes darted nervously, but there was no shock, only calculation. Robert's expression flickered between irritation and contempt, like a man annoyed that his plan wasn't unfolding on schedule. And Daniel? He wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than anything his family had ever said. I felt the familiar impulse rise, the urge to explain myself, to justify my worth, to make them understand I wasn't the enemy. But I didn't. Instead, I asked myself a single grounding question. When was the last time he chose me? Not in public, not performatively, but privately, honestly. I couldn't find an answer. Robert broke the silence first. "This is unnecessary drama," he said sharply. "You always take things personally." Always. That word carried 6 years of dismissal with it. I swallowed and spoke carefully. Then why am I hearing about my replacement over Christmas dinner? Daniel finally looked at me then. His eyes were hard. This wouldn't be happening if you knew how to play your role, he said. You don't fit the image we need. We, not he. We. That pronoun told me everything. I nodded slowly. Is that what you believe? I asked. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Yes. The lie was clean. Too clean. It slid into place with practice. I felt grief then, not explosive grief. The quiet kind. The kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. I thought about every compromise I had made, every apology I offered for things I hadn't done. Every time I softened my voice so he wouldn't feel threatened, and I saw it clearly. None of it had been enough, because the goalposts were never meant to stay still. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. So when I spoke again, I didn't defend myself. I clarified. Then let's be very clear, I said, my voice steady. I didn't fail to meet expectations. Robert frowned. I exceeded the ones that mattered. That was the moment Daniel realized he was losing control of the narrative. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. We can talk about this later, he said, privately. I met his gaze. No, I replied quietly. You invited witnesses. Let's not waste them. His jaw tightened. And for the first time, I saw fear flicker beneath his anger. Once I refused to back down, everything unraveled quickly. Robert leaned forward first, elbows pressing into the polished table as if he could physically impose his authority. This discussion ends now, he said. You're being emotional. There it was, the word men like him used when women stopped obeying. Daniel seized it immediately. Exactly, he added. You're overreacting. We were just discussing options. Options. As if my life were a slide deck. I looked at him, my husband, and felt something inside me harden. Options don't usually involve inviting my replacement to dinner, I said. Or announcing my divorce before I've even agreed to one. Lisa scoffed, swirling her wine. Oh, don't be dramatic, she said. Everyone saw this coming. I turned to her slowly. Did they? I asked. Or did you just assume I wouldn't fight back? Her smile faltered. Robert tried another tactic. Concern. Think about the family, he said, lowering his voice. About reputation. About what people will say. I almost laughed. For years, they had humiliated me publicly without a second thought. Now they wanted discretion. That's interesting, I replied. You didn't seem worried about reputation when you announced my professional death over roast turkey. The tension in the room thickened. Daniel reached for my arm under the table. A warning squeeze. I removed his hand. That small act shifted something fundamental. His face darkened. You're making a mistake, he said through clenched teeth. You don't know how this world works without us. Without you, he meant. I inhaled slowly. You're right, I said. I didn't know how it worked. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. But I learned. The sound it made against the wood was quiet, but final. Daniel's eyes locked onto it. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. It means, I said evenly, that when my husband started coming home late 3 afternoons a week, I stopped asking questions and started paying attention. Lisa froze. Robert frowned. Daniel's face drained of color. You're accusing me of something now? He snapped. I tilted my head. Every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, I continued. The St. Regis, same suite, room service for 2. The silence was immediate and absolute. Lisa's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against her plate. Robert's mouth opened, then closed. Daniel stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched against the floor. You went through my privacy, he shouted. This is insane. I didn't raise my voice. I went through our joint credit card statement, I said calmly. The one your hotel visits were charged to. His breath came shallow and fast. I tapped my phone. Receipts, timestamps, confirmations from the hotel. Lisa stared at him, horrified. Daniel, she whispered. You didn't. He couldn't answer. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear I'd been carrying loosened its grip. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was watching them collapse under the weight of their own lies. For a brief moment after the accusations landed, no one spoke. The room didn't explode immediately. It imploded. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, his face pale and slick with sweat. Robert stared at him with an expression I had never seen before, shock mixed with something dangerously close to fear. Lisa looked like a child who had just realized the adults in her life were liars. And me? I felt strangely hollow, not victorious, not satisfied, just empty. Because no matter how justified I was, no matter how clearly the truth was unraveling in front of them, the reality remained the same. My husband had betrayed me, not just strategically. He hadn't slipped. He hadn't made a mistake. He had made a plan. The weight of that realization pressed down on my chest until it felt hard to breathe. 6 years. 6 years of shared mornings, shared dinners, shared holidays. 6 years of defending him when my instincts whispered something was wrong. And he had been building a second life in hotel rooms while smiling across the breakfast table. Daniel finally spoke, his voice cracking. This isn't what it looks like. The words were automatic, empty. I looked at him and felt tears burn behind my eyes for the first time that night. Not because I believed him, because I had once loved him enough to want to. You don't get to say that, I replied quietly. Not after this. Robert slammed his hand on the table. This is private, he barked. You will not destroy this family over your feelings. My feelings. As if betrayal were a mood swing. I stood there, surrounded by people who had never truly seen me, never protected me, never chosen me. And I felt completely alone, even in that crowded, glittering dining room. The chandelier above us sparkled relentlessly, indifferent to the collapse happening beneath it. For the first time, doubt crept in. Not about the truth, about myself. Was I strong enough to walk away from everything? From the life I'd built around this marriage? From the version of myself that kept trying to belong where I never would? The grief hit then, not loud, not dramatic, heavy. It settled into my shoulders, my spine, my hands. I realized I was mourning something that had never truly existed. The marriage I believed in. The family I kept trying to earn. The future I thought I was protecting. Daniel took a step toward me. We can fix this, he said desperately. Just don't do this here, please. I searched his face for sincerity. I didn't find it. What I found was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences. And in that moment, standing in the emotional wreckage of my own life, I understood something painful and freeing at the same time. This was as low as it went, and that meant there was only one direction left. Something changed inside me as Daniel stood there pleading, not loudly, not dramatically. It was quieter than that. The doubt that had weighed on me just moments earlier didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. I realized something fundamental. I wasn't standing in front of them because I was weak. I was standing there because I had tolerated too much. Robert cleared his throat, trying to reclaim the room. This conversation has gone far enough, he said stiffly. We'll handle this legally. Legally. That word finally snapped everything into focus. I straightened my posture and met his gaze. I agree, I said calmly. Let's talk about legality. The way his expression tightened told me he already sensed where this was going. I turned my attention back to Daniel. You knew, I said softly. You knew your father was planning this dinner. You knew Alex was coming. You knew what they intended to announce. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. That hesitation was answer enough. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth, I continued. I waited, I watched, and when you didn't choose honesty, I prepared. I reached for the manila folder resting beside my bag and placed it on the table. Robert stiffened. Lisa leaned forward, her eyes wide. What's that? She whispered. Documentation, I replied. Something your family seems to respect. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were copies of incorporation records, ownership certificates, and advisory agreements. I slid the first document toward Robert. This company, I said evenly, was incorporated under my name 3 years before I married your son. I slid the next one. You were listed as an advisor. No equity, no voting rights, no ownership claims. Robert's face went rigid. That's not how you assumed it, I corrected. I turned to Lisa next. Those patents you've been bragging about? I personally hired the R&D team that developed them. I paid for the equipment. I own the facilities. Her mouth fell open. Then I faced Daniel again. And the prenup, I said quietly. You remember that clause about separate property? His eyes dropped. You signed it, I reminded him. After your lawyer explained it in detail. The silence was suffocating. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally clearing his throat. I was not told any of this, he said carefully. I met his eyes. I know. That was when reality fully set in. This wasn't my word against theirs. It was paper, contracts, signatures, truth, documented. For the first time all evening, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And they knew it. The shift was immediate, not emotional, structural, like watching a building realize its foundation was gone. Robert was the first to truly unravel. For years, he had spoken with the confidence of a man who believed control was permanent. Now his hands trembled as he flipped through the documents, his lips moving silently as if rereading them might somehow change what they said. This is ridiculous, he snapped finally. You can't just claim everything. I didn't raise my voice. I don't have to claim it, I said. I already own it. Daniel looked between us, panic replacing anger. You wouldn't actually do this, he said, his voice breaking. You wouldn't destroy our family. Our family. The phrase sounded hollow now. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. I just stopped pretending. That was when I turned back to Robert. Since we're being transparent, I said, we should probably talk about how you've been using the company expense account. His head snapped up. What are you talking about? I opened another folder. $47,000 in vintage wine. $68,000 annually in country club memberships. A 42-foot yacht charged as a mobile office. Lisa gasped. Daddy, you said... I know what I said, Robert barked, his voice suddenly sharp with desperation. I continued calmly. The yacht was seized earlier tonight. It's already listed for sale. The color drained from his face. You can't do that, he whispered. That's theft. I met his eyes steadily. Charging personal luxuries to a company you don't own is theft, I said. And that's before we discuss the consulting fees you've been paying yourself. $30,000 a month for strategic guidance. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Lisa started crying then, not quietly. Ugly, panicked sobs. What will people say? She wailed. Our reputation will not protect you from auditors, I replied gently. Daniel finally broke. This is insane, he said hoarsely. You're ruining everything. I watched him carefully. His fear wasn't about losing me. It was about losing access, losing comfort, losing status, losing the illusion of entitlement. Alex stood up, slowly. I think I should leave, he said. This feels inappropriate. No, Daniel snapped. You can't just walk out. Alex turned to him, his voice steady. I was invited under false pretenses, he said, and I'm not interested in participating in fraud. He looked at me. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. I didn't know. I know, I replied. And just like that, he was gone. The door closing behind him sounded final. With Alex's departure, whatever restraint the family had left disintegrated. Daniel shouted. Lisa cried. Robert threatened lawsuits and connections and consequences that no longer meant anything. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I buttoned my coat. Well, I said calmly, this has been enlightening. They all froze. You can't just leave, Daniel said, his voice cracking. We need to fix this. I looked at him one last time. There's nothing to fix, I said. There's only reality. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing through the dining room. At the threshold, I turned back. Merry Christmas, I said quietly. My lawyers will be in touch. And then I left them there, surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. The drive away from that house felt unreal. Snow fell softly, coating the streets in white, turning the city into something peaceful and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, my shoulders relaxed, not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped losing myself. I didn't go back to the house Daniel and I shared. That place had never really been mine. Instead, I drove to the townhouse I had quietly purchased 3 years earlier, under the name of one of my holding companies. Modest, brick, 3 bedrooms in a quiet neighborhood where no one cared who my family was. I had been moving things there slowly for months. Books, clothes, objects that mattered. Inside, the silence was complete. No criticism, no lectures, no tension masquerading as love. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Daniel, Robert, Lisa. I let every call go to voicemail. That act alone felt revolutionary. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, the good kind I kept here, and sat by the window, watching snow settle on the sidewalk. Around midnight, the messages slowed. Threats gave way to desperation. Desperation gave way to silence. And in that silence, I understood something important. Power isn't loud. It doesn't need witnesses. It lives in boundaries, in preparation, in knowing when to walk away without looking back. They had tried to humiliate me. Instead, they reminded me who I was before I started shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. I wasn't someone's upgrade. I wasn't a placeholder. I wasn't a role to be replaced. I was the foundation they had been standing on without realizing it. As I finished my drink and prepared for the first peaceful night of sleep I'd had in years, I smiled. Not with bitterness, but clarity. Sometimes the greatest gift betrayal gives you is permission. Permission to leave. Permission to choose yourself. Permission to stop begging for a seat at a table you built. And that, more than money, more than status, more than revenge, was freedom.